I want to talk to you today about something bigger than policy, bigger than headlines. It's about values, it's about partnership, and it's about the truth hiding underneath power plays that affect millions of people. And I'm talking about the recent statement made by former President Donald Trump. He stood there, bold as ever, saying that the U.S. India trade deal isn't finalized, and if things don't go his way, tariffs could rise as high as 25%. Now, when I heard that, I paused. I thought about the factory worker in Ahmedabad whose job depends on textile exports. I thought about the young entrepreneur in Chicago trying to import affordable IT components to start a business. And I thought about all the people in between, people who don't make the deals, but who live through the consequences. See, Trump's style has always been loud, unapologetically direct. And to some people that feels like strength. But let me ask you, is it truly strong to dangle threats over the heads of your allies? Is it strong to destabilize a relationship that has taken decades of diplomacy, shared vision, and hard work to build? We're not just talking about goods here, we're talking about trust. India and the United States, these two great nations, have been walking a long, sometimes complicated path together. They are democracies, they are innovators, and they are deeply connected by millions of families, students, and business people crossing oceans of hope. And yet here we are, a headline, a microphone, and a threat. Tariffs, they sound like numbers on a page, but behind those numbers are real lives. Let me tell you the story of Ritu, a small garment exporter in Delhi. She has 40 women working in her workshop, women who support entire households. Their livelihood depends on the ability to ship clothes to American stores at a fair cost. But if a 25% tariff is slapped on her products, it's not just math, it's food on the table, it's children's tuition, it's dignity. I think about how quickly leadership turns into leverage when ego walks into the room. And I say that not to point fingers, because let's be real, this is not just about Donald Trump. This is about a system that allows threats to become tactics, where fear becomes negotiation, and where human impact is measured in polls and profits, not purpose. But I've also seen the power of transformation. I've seen what happens when people, yes, even presidents, choose wisdom over dominance. Because if you peel back the bravado, what we really see in this moment is a deep fear. A fear of losing control, of slipping in influence, of not being the one who dictates the rules. That's what Trump's tariff threat tells us. He said the deal isn't finalized, and maybe it isn't. Maybe there are hurdles to work through. Maybe India wants more space to protect its farmers, or the U.S. wants greater access for its pharmaceutical companies. That's part of negotiation. But negotiation built on trust is not the same as negotiation driven by intimidation. And here's the other part we cannot forget. This isn't just about two countries, it's about the entire global economy watching closely. When the United States threatens India, smaller nations tremble. They wonder if this is how friends are treated. What chance do they have? Now I know some of you may think, but Oprah, isn't this just business? And to that I say, business without humanity is just greed in a suit. A trade deal is not just about tariffs and timelines. It's about how we see each other. Are we partners or are we pawns? Because the world is listening. India is listening, so is every citizen who has ever dreamed of progress, partnership, and peace. There comes a time when we must stop and ask ourselves, what are we really doing with the power we hold? That question echoed in my spirit when I heard Donald Trump declare that the U.S. India trade deal hadn't been finalized, and that if things didn't move in his favor, he'd hit India with tariffs as high as 20%. You see, that wasn't just a policy update. That was a warning shot. And it wasn't subtle, it was sharp. And I knew in that moment, we weren't just talking about business or trade. We were looking straight into the soul of how leadership is being wielded. Not with grace, not with diplomacy, but with a clenched fist. I've watched people like Donald Trump long enough to understand their language. The bravado, the posturing, the need to dominate every room. That's not strength, That's fear wrapped in loudness. When you lead from ego, deals become battles, allies become bargaining chips, and relationships, real, long-standing, mutually nurtured relationships like the one between India and the United States, become nothing more than leverage. But relationships are not meant to be used. They are meant to be respected, built upon, and deep. And when you threaten to blow them up over tariffs, over pride, over not getting your way, what you're really saying is, I don't see your value unless you submit. And what breaks my heart most is that behind every tariff, every threat, every policy shift, there are people, real people with dreams and bills and mouths to feed. A 25% tariff isn't just a number, it's a mother in Ludhiana whose textile shipments to Chicago keep her family afloat. It's a small shop owner in Dallas who relies on Indian imports to run his business. It's the quiet daily rhythm of global cooperation that lets families survive. When Trump speaks of tariffs, he doesn't talk about the chain reaction, the layoffs, the lost contracts, the sudden hike in prices. He speaks as if this is a chessboard and people are just pawns. But I have seen the pain that follows these kinds of decisions. I have held the hands of the people who can't recover once the system has crushed them. And that pain deepens when it comes from someone who should know better. Because America and India, we've come a long way. This relationship wasn't born out of convenience. It's rooted in democracy, in dreams, in diversity. Two nations oceans apart, yet connected by values, by shared hopes, and by millions of lives that move between them like a beautiful thread. Over the decades, through conflict and cooperation, we've built something that matters. Students, scientists, software engineers, artists, all have helped weave this fabric. But Trump's words, they were like a scissor cutting through that thread, as if none of that mattered, as if years of progress, diplomacy, and understanding could be reduced to a single sentence. We'll raise tariffs. It's not just about India, it's about every smaller nation watching from the sidelines, wondering if they'll be next. Because when giants clash, tremors are felt far and wide. The world watches how the United States treats its allies, especially rising powers like India, and they draw conclusions. If Trump threatens India, a fellow democracy, with such arrogance, what hope does a smaller country have? It creates an atmosphere of fear, of hesitation, trade slow, deals stall, global trust erodes. And that damage is harder to quantify than dollars and cents. Because once trust is broken on the global stage, it doesn't just get patched up, it leaves a scar. But I've learned something over the years. When a leader makes noise, you have to ask what's happening behind that noise. And here I see politics, a performance. Trump isn't just talking to India, he's talking to his. He's dusting off that old America First slogan and putting on a show. Tough on trade, strong on foreign policy, that's the image he wants to paint. But here's the truth, it's not strength when your policies are performance pieces. It's not leadership when the loudest voice in the room is also the most reckless. Because while he's scoring political points, someone's job is disappearing. While he's grabbing headlines, someone's supply chain is unraveling. And that's the cost of turning diplomacy into theater. So now we stand at a crossroads. The moral test of power has arrived, not just for Trump, but for all of us, for India, for the United States, for the global community. Will we choose fear or will we choose faith? Will we continue to allow the currency of global trade to be threats and intimidation? Or will we insist on something more, on respect, on fairness, on collaboration? Because the future, the real sustainable, hopeful future, does not belong to those who shout, it belongs to those who listen, who lead with humility, who make space for shared prosperity instead of hoarding power. That is the leadership we need. That is the vision we deserve. And that is the only trade worth making. And as I sat with that thought of leadership, shaped more by performance than principle, I found myself asking, what happens when we forget that behind every decision, every policy, every tariff, there are people, real people, not statistics, not talking points. People with names, families, ambitions, and fears. Because these aren't just trade disruptions. These are emotional earthquakes that shake the stability of millions of lives. We hear the phrase 25% tariff, and it rolls off the tongue like a business term. But I want you to imagine something with me. Imagine you're Priya, a 34-year-old woman from Jaipur, India. She's been running her family's small jewelry export business since her father passed away. Her primary buyers are in New York and Atlanta. She employs 12 local artisans, mostly women. That's not just a company, that's a community. That's empowerment in motion. But with a 25% tariff, those buyers start canceling orders. They can't afford the markup. They start sourcing from elsewhere. Priya's income drops, orders dry up, and those 12 women, each supporting entire families, suddenly find themselves staring into the eyes of uncertainty. That's not just economics, that's heartbreak. Now zoom out, because it's not just Priya, it's Rajiv who exports cotton, it's Neha who supplies handcrafted stationeries. It's thousands of Indian SMEs that built their futures on the hope of fair and open trade with the United States. And let's not forget their counterparts in America, the boutique owner in Boston, who relies on Indian goods to stock her store. The startup in Silicon Valley, importing tools from Hyderabad to finish their prototypes. These tariffs, these decisions made from podiums with no empathy, affect all of them. We've got to stop pretending that these deals are cold, emotionless transactions. Trade is not just money moving across borders, it's people connecting, dreams colliding, futures intertwining. It's a human story told through shipping crates and customs paper. And when someone like Donald Trump makes it sound like it's all just numbers and leverage, it makes me wonder if we've lost touch with the humanity that underpins our entire global economy. Because here's the deeper truth, these kinds of threats don't just shake economies, they shatter the confidence of those trying to rise. Think of a young girl in Pune who watches her mother lose her garment job because the export orders vanished overnight. What message does that send her? That her future is disposable, that she doesn't matter if she's not in the boardroom making the deal. That's where the pain cuts deepest, when people feel they're invisible in decisions that impact everything in their lives. And the emotional weight of that becomes unbearable when we remember that all this could be avoided, that dignity in diplomacy is a choice, that sitting at the table with humility and mutual respect is possible, that partnership doesn't have to come with threats. But it takes a different kind of courage, not the bravado of making bold claims, but the quiet strength to truly care, to see beyond the next election cycle, to put people before pride. What we're seeing now isn't just a trade dispute, it's a mirror held up to our values. And what reflects back is troubling, because if the most powerful leaders in the world can make decisions that ripple through the lives of everyday people with so little compassion, then we are in trouble. The soul of global leadership is at stake, and the ones paying the price are the ones whose stories never get told on television. So yes, Donald Trump may be trying to negotiate a deal, he may think this pressure is a tactic, but when pressure becomes pain, when strategy becomes suffering, we have crossed a moral line, and we must say it with love, with power, and with unwavering truth, that the world cannot afford to let compassion be the casualty of competition. And as we reflect on that pain, not just economic, but spiritual and social, we must come home to a deeper question. What was this relationship supposed to be? Because this dynamic of threats and pressure and posturing was never what the U.S. India alliance was built for. These two great democracies weren't drawn together just to exchange goods and services. No, they came together because they recognized something in one another, a shared hunger for freedom, for progress, for building something greater than what either could build alone. I remember when President Obama visited India and said, "We are natural allies." That wasn't just a poetic phrase, that was a promise, a recognition that our destinies were not in competition, they were aligned. So when someone like Donald Trump stands before the world and holds a deal hostage, a deal that should symbolize cooperation, it's not just offensive, it's heartbreaking. It dismisses decades of trust, of intention, of carefully nurtured progress, and it makes me think about all the people who have spent their lives working to build those bridges between India and the United States. Diplomats who've spent years negotiating balanced policies, students who've crossed oceans to share knowledge, business people who've invested not just their money but their dreams, families who've been split between the two countries, yet feel a part of both. All of them are now caught in the crossfire of one man's ambition. because the U.S. India relationship is not just about trade, it's about culture, it's about tech innovation, it's about global health, education, space exploration, it's about two nations that represent the possibility of pluralism, of unity within diversity. And when one leader speaks in a tone that reduces all of that to a tariff number, when he suggests either explicitly or implicitly that India must bend or break, that's not just poor strategy, that's a betrayal of the spirit that's held this relationship up all these years. You see, I've always believed that power is best used not to dominate but to elevate. And this relationship, one of the most important bilateral relationships in the 21st century, deserves to be elevated, not manipulated. We need leaders who look at this bond and say, how do we make this stronger? How do we heal the wounds of inequality on both sides through this partnership? Not, how do I get more leverage? And yet that's exactly where we are, a moment where leverage has replaced legacy, where the shared memory of cooperation is being rewritten by the ink of intimidation. And let's be clear, this is not just about who wins or loses a negotiation. This is about whether the partnership itself can survive the strain of being treated like a transaction. Because when you reduce a relationship to numbers, you strip it of its soul. Think about what would happen if India responded in kind, if it said, fine, you want to play hardball, we will too. What message would that send? It would say to the world that even democracies with long-standing alliances can be torn apart by ego, that mutual respect is fragile, that all it takes is one man to unravel decades of diplomacy, and that is not the future we need. What we need is a revival of purpose, a return to the spirit in which this partnership was first formed, not out of convenience, but out of a shared vision. We need to remember that what connects these two nations is far greater than what divides them, and far more powerful than any tariff threat could ever be. And if we forget that if we allow the noise of one moment to erase the truth of years, we risk more than an unfinished trade deal. We risk losing the very trust that held this relationship together when the world felt like it was falling apart. So no, this is not just about India or America. It's about whether we can still believe in the beauty of alliances, whether we still value the kind of leadership that builds instead of breaks, whether we, the people across continents, languages, and time zones, can say to those in power, you don't get to destroy something just because you didn't get your way. And as we hold on to that belief that this relationship deserves more than what it's being handed right now, we must open our eyes to something even larger. Because this isn't just about one deal or one insult or one leader. No, this is about the ripple, the wave echo that travels far beyond New Delhi or Washington, D.C. Because when giants like India and the United States collide, even with words, even with policy, the world watches and the world feels. You see, every time a microphone crackles with a threat like that 25% tariff, the tremor isn't contained. It moves, it reverberates across borders and into the hearts of smaller nations, those whose economies rely on trust, on predictability, on alliances between stable power. When Trump threatens India, it's not just India that feels the chill, it's Vietnam, it's Ghana, it's Peru, countries that look to these two democracies for leadership, who model their trade frameworks, their diplomacy, even their constitutions, on the balance and grace they believe America and India represent. But when that balance is replaced with bullying, when that grace is replaced with gamesmanship, the foundation starts to crack. It tells the world, even among allies, you are only as valuable as your willingness to obey. And my friends, that is not leadership. That is intimidation dressed up in the language of business. I want to take you into the shoes of a young trade minister from a developing country. He's just signed a deal with an American firm to bring affordable medicines into his country, sourced partly through Indian pharmaceutical partner. His people need this desperately. He's hopeful, inspired even by the collaboration between India and the United States. And then this tariff threats, policy disruption, a souring of trust. Now that deal, it's in jeopardy. His faith in the system shaken, his people at risk. That's how wide the ripple travels. We often think that global politics lives up high in summit rooms, trade forums, air-conditioned negotiations, but in truth, global politics breathes on the ground. In hospitals, in farms, in classrooms, in factories. It's alive in the simple truth that when two nations cooperate, others thrive. And when they go to war, even a silent war of economic pressure, others suffer. And it doesn't stop at trade. It spreads into security cooperation, into climate policy, into vaccine distribution, into artificial intelligence and space research. Because the US and India are not just economic partners, they're global anchors. And when an anchor starts to drift, everyone tied to it begins to sway. So when Trump says the deal isn't finalized and that he's ready to impose tariffs if he doesn't like how things are going, he's not just unsettling markets, he's unsettling minds. He's telling the world alliances are conditional. He's saying we don't shake hands anymore. We issue warning. That's a dangerous message because it sets a precedent. It tells other powerful countries that bullying works, that if you want something you don't negotiate, you pressure. And we've seen where that leads. We've seen the damage done when threats become normalized. We've seen global trust collapse under the weight of ego-driven politics. And what's worse, we allow the loudest, most reckless voices to define the tone of diplomacy. We let them steal the narrative while the quieter, steadier hands, the ones really doing the work of peace, are drowned out. But it doesn't have to be that way. There is still time to change course, to reclaim the spirit of true partnership, to say to the world, especially to the younger generation watching all of this, that yes, we had a moment of tension, a moment of doubt, a moment where it looked like threats might win the day, but then we remembered who we were, and we chose differently. Because the power of an alliance lies not in how it behaves when things are easy, but in how it responds when things get hard. And right now, things are hard, but the story isn't finished. And how we respond in this moment, whether with more posturing or with real maturity, will shape not just the future of U.S.-India relations, but the future of how the world sees hope itself. And so we come to this moment, a moment that asks not just who is making noise, but why. Because when someone like Donald Trump steps up and stirs the air with tariff threats and tough talk, you've got to ask yourself, what's really going on here? Because I'll tell you this, most of the time, when the volume gets that loud, it's covering something up. And what I see here isn't about trade, it's not even about India, it's about performance, it's about politics, it's about one man standing on a stage and needing to remind the world, or perhaps just himself, that he still holds power. You see, in Trump's world, every negotiation is a performance piece. And we've watched this show before. It's the same script, just a different set. Whether it's China or NATO or now India, the pattern is clear: escalate, threaten, dominate, and then claim victory whether or not anything actually changes. It's a tactic designed not to solve problems, but to score political points, to get a headline, to stir the bait, to say, look, I'm fighting for America, when what's really happening is that he's using fear as a tool to reassert control. Because this tariff threat, it's about elections, it's about image. Trump knows that the economy and foreign policy are powerful pillars in any campaign. He knows that painting India as a tough negotiator gives him an excuse to act tough in return. And he knows that every time he talks about bringing jobs back to America or punishing countries that take advantage, there's a certain part of the electorate that stands up and claps, even if the reality is far more complicated than that applause can understand. But here's the thing, when policy becomes theater, people become props. They become backdrops for political power plays, and that is one of the most dangerous shifts a democracy can make, because instead of governing for the people, you start performing for them. You start making decisions not based on what's right, but on what looks strong, and that is exactly what's happening now. And I want you to think about what that does to trust, not just between nations, but between leaders and citizens. If deals are only made or broken based on how they serve one man's political future, what does that say to the farmer in Punjab or the software engineer in Bangalore or the importer in Ohio? It says you're only important as long as you fit the narrative. It tells them that their lives, their actual livelihoods, are up for auction on the stage of American politics. But even more painful is this: the people being used in this performance often have no idea they're in the script. They just wake up one morning to rising costs, canceled contracts, regulatory uncertainty, and headlines they didn't ask for, and they're left to wonder why they're suddenly in the crosshairs of a political show that was never meant for them to understand, let alone survive. And that's the true heartbreak here, that we have allowed power to become a spotlight instead of a sacred responsibility, that we've let leadership become a brand instead of a call, that in the noise and the flash and the drama of it all, we've forgotten the quiet, essential work of stewardship, of caring for the agreements, the people, the relationships that truly hold the world together. But even now, yes, even in the midst of this orchestrated chaos, I believe there's a way forward, because people are waking up, they're watching closer, they're asking questions, they're starting to understand that real leadership doesn't perform, it listens, it studies, it cares. And so the question we must all carry now is this: Will we continue to accept showmanship as strategy? Will we let a man's campaign needs rewrite the rules of global cooperation? Or will we say with clarity, with courage, with calm, that relationships this sacred, this historic, and this meaningful are not to be used as props for power, because when all the lights fade and the stage is gone and the noise has passed, what we'll be left with are the consequences, the broken deals, the bruised trust, the people who will still be there trying to rebuild what was damaged in the name of a moment that was never about them at all. And when the curtain finally falls on this moment, when the headlines grow old and the cameras shift to a new story, we are still left with one final question, perhaps the most important one of all. What kind of power do we want to follow? Because this isn't just about Donald Trump. It's about a world that is constantly watching, constantly choosing, constantly deciding who gets to lead and what that leadership looks like. And right now, in this moment of tension and tariff threats and unfinished trade deals, the world is watching to see whether power will choose fear or faith, because that is the moral test of power, not how loud you are but how responsible you are with the influence you've been given. And when Trump speaks with the threat of 25% tariffs hanging in the air, it isn't just about economics, it's about the deeper message being sent to every nation, every voter, every child, learning what leadership is supposed to be. What do we do with the power we hold? Do we weaponize it or do we use it to lift others up? That is the question. That is the difference between fear and faith. Fear says, if I don't win, I will punish you. Faith says, even if we disagree, I will honor you. Fear issues ultimatums. Faith builds partnerships. Fear isolates. Faith connects. And the truth is, the kind of power Trump is showing right now, the kind that threatens corners and commands, it doesn't build anything that lasts. It only burns. I have seen what power can do when it is rooted in grace, not greed. I've seen leaders sit across from each other, continents and cultures apart, and choose to listen instead of shout. I've seen deals that changed millions of lives, born out of mutual respect, not manipulation. And I've seen people, not presidents, not billionaires, just people suffer because someone in power decided that control was more important than connection. And that's why this moment matters. Because how we respond to this as citizens, as global observers, as voices that refuse to be silenced, will shape not just the future of U.S.-India relations, but the moral compass of international cooperation. Do we endorse power that behaves like a wrecking, or do we insist on something better? Because here's the truth, and it's a hard one, but it's real. If India caves under the pressure of this threat, it sets a precedent that will haunt every future negotiation. And if it responds with the same kind of force, if it retaliates instead of reaching higher, then we've all lost something, not just a deal, but a vision, a chance to show the world that even in moments of disagreement, dignity is not negotiable. This is the moment to rise, not with more anger, not with matching threats, but with a calm, resolute clarity that says, we know who we are, because India knows who it is, the United States knows who it can be. And together, if they can look past the loud voices, past the political noise, past the performance, they can still write a different ending, an ending where the trade deal is finalized, not out of fear but out of fairness, an ending where both nations walk away not just with signed documents, but with a renewed sense of what partnership really means, an ending where the people, the exporters and importers, the students and workers, the mothers and dreamers, are not just bystanders, but beneficiaries. And more than anything, an ending where the world can say we witnessed a moment where two of the largest democracies didn't let pride or pressure define them, they let purpose lead. So to those in power I say this, the spotlight may shine on you for a season, but history shines on those who choose compassion, choose wisdom, choose faith, because the real power, it doesn't come from a threat, it comes from the courage to rise above one.